Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Education Matters with Jim O'Connell. And if you're watching live, there should be a phone number on the screen. The phone number for calling in is 640-3091. I welcome your calls as always. Here we are in the last week of June, and the first really nice day in a few days. So hopefully we'll have a wonderful week next week for July 4th holiday. That's a week from tomorrow. We won't be having a program recorded next week, so it's likely, I think, that this program will be repeated for the week of July 4th as well. So if you're watching in that delayed time period, I'm wishing you a happy July 4th. It's a wonderful opportunity for people to think, I think, more deeply on those things which makes America great and brings us all together, as opposed to the things that divide us. And sadly, there are a lot of things. At least it would appear that way today. There's a great incivility in our conversations, and I try my darndest to ensure that no matter how contentious the topics may be, and no matter how difficult they are to speak about, that at least we should be able to maintain civility. Before going on to other things, I would like to point out the celebration of July 4th in the city is on July 3rd, so a week from tonight, Tuesday, July 3rd. The Independence Day celebration will be on starting at 6 o'clock. Food and beverage vendors will be available at Arms Park. So this is the fireworks. So starting at 6 o'clock, and then at 7:30, the 39th Army Band will start at about 7:30 and play until fireworks begin at 9:30. There are lots of great vantage points in the city. The fireworks, if you want to be right underneath them by the Bridge Street Bridge, then Arms Park is great. But I know there are lots of other places. People even watch them from across the river. Up on Derryfield, on the hill in Derryfield, at Derryfield Park, there's always a crowd of families sitting there, laying out their beach chairs and things to watch the fireworks go off. And here's another example of the city of Manchester doing the right thing and putting this free event on. If you stay away from Arms Park, if you don't want to have to buy your kids some whatever it might be, a burger or a dog or something, then you can view more remotely. But listening to the Army Band is a wonderful thing too, and it's just a wonderful sense of occasion. So I would urge people, there's no reason to be sitting, if the weather's nice especially, there's no reason to be sitting at home next Tuesday night if you're in the greater Manchester area. Come out, be part of the community and celebrate. It's always a fun time. And the fireworks are not too shabby either. I think Manchester has done a great job of putting on a really good fireworks display, and we're very lucky, because there are. If you go to some smaller towns or cities, then the displays are obviously suitably and appropriately smaller. But the one here is pretty big. There is one on over at Hampton Beach, and I'm not sure which night that is. But Manchester, July 3rd, Tuesday night. Actually, if you're watching this in what would normally be its lifetime slot, which is at 6 o'clock on Tuesdays, if you're watching this next week on the 3rd, then you're just in time to go down to Arms Park and listen to the Army Band at 7:30, the 39th Army Band, and the fireworks will start at 9:30. So there you go. I'd like to continue just briefly talking about the subject that we mentioned last week that I want to reiterate, which is the whole idea of kids having having a summer drop, so to speak, in academics because lots of kids and maybe families more generally are inclined to put the books away and backpacks and throw them in some closet in the hallway to be to have the dust blown off of them and to be dragged out on the first week of September. And I think that's mostly healthy because I think it's good that kids have a break and a change up, etc. But I think a total break is probably a problem, and so I strongly suggest that that everybody with kids, whatever age, the older ones, try to encourage them to do some reading. Over the summertime, and younger kids, I think, spoon feeding them books and reading time. And now that my kids are older, and the youngest is a 16-year-old, and I remember, some of the fondest memories I have are of my kids when they were little and spending time reading with them, and it is it's a joy that shouldn't be missed by people. And I think today, because things are hectic, because there's TV, because there's mobile phones and the internet and all the other distractions of the world, it's hard to, well, it actually isn't hard, just people don't set aside some time for reading a simple book. My fond memory of it, and those of you with little kids will remember this, how kids like to read the same book over and over again. You can have like 100 books, and if you've got a 3 or 4-year-old, they want to read that same book until it's dog-eared, and it's just the joy in their faces as they reach the turn of the page, knowing, anticipating what's coming up next because they've read it 400 times. They know exactly what's coming up on the next page, and I'm no anti-technology guy. I think there's a lot of good to be had from our Apple products and iPhones, etc. But there's a great joy in a single book. So. And if I haven't been explicit about it, obviously anybody who looks at this topic knows that any kid who reads is going to be academically better off, and particularly any kid who doesn't have a drop off during the summertime, who makes some effort during those long summer weeks to take a look at their homework or at their reading again. It's a good thing. Now, high school kids, of course, have got reading lists usually. I think all high school kids have got a list of books they should read for the summer. And I remember this time last year there was a very robust. You can read something else into robust if you want, because it got a little angry. I thought. I remember on Facebook or some other social media there was a debate going on. Where a parent or two in Manchester took great umbrage at the idea that the school had requested, they would have said demanded, I guess, but had said reading certain books that needed to be read during the summertime. And this parent or two were very upset about it. And, I respect parents, etc., but I think... there's nothing bad can happen from having your kid read a book or two. And I guess in this parents' world, it was that reading was an absolute drudgery, as I remember, to this person's kid, and so therefore, like, her point as a parent was she didn't want to have a 2-month-long battle of forcing a kid to do something they really didn't want to do. And I understand that, and I've empathy for that, and or sympathy for that, and but. Right there is the nub of the problem, right? Then, the idea would be as an adult to try and find some way to make that a better experience for a kid, and you can use your own imaginations with that. But clearly, I think if everybody listening to this program were to take to heart the idea of doing some reading with their kids, or if they have older kids, pushing them to do some reading during the summer, there'll be no end to the benefits from it. Another short advertiser is for the fall leagues, and in my case, I'm particularly devoted to soccer. But all the fall leagues are. This is a time rather than waiting till the panic in late August and when their teams filled out and slots are harder to get. Now is a great time to sign up for the various leagues. And in the case of soccer, Manchester North Soccer League, which is MNSL. .com. If you go on there, you can sign up your kid for the fall. And also, there's a wonderful soccer camp that is held on the last week of July and the first week of August over at Livingston Park, right by the pool, and in those back fields there. And that's called The British Are Coming, and that also is accessible through the MNSL website. Says he as he sucks a little water. Okay, so one other thing from the district's website. I think knowing just the calendar, we won't go into much of it other than to note that the new student enrollment days are on August 7th, 8th and 9th. The schools will be open for those from 9 to 12 and from 3 to 6. And that's Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, August 7th, 8th, and 9th. Let me just see some before the registration before the first day. Oh, I'm sorry, and they're at specific buildings. Tuesday, August the 7th, from 9 to 12 and 3 to 6 is at Beach Street Elementary. On Wednesday, August 8 from 9 to 12 and from 3 to 6 at Goslar Park Elementary, and on Thursday 9 to 12 and 3 to 6 at Bakersville. And any children that, of course, are currently in Manchester schools, even in kindergarten, they're automatically registered for next year, unless so they're automatically registered for next year unless you tell the district that you're not going to be in, of course. What you need to bring if you are a new resident to the city, or at least if your student's going to be new to the city, to the public school system, is a proof of age, such as a birth certificate, passport, or a signed affidavit, 2 proofs of residence, such as utility bills or rental agreement, your kid's immunization and physical exam records, and for middle or high schools, your child's last report card. This is something that for most people listening to this, it probably isn't impactful because your kids are already in school or have been in school. Some of you who have new kids who are about to enter the system, then it is. But by the nature of Manchester, there's a there's a significant number of kids who arrive into our system and they're part of our system every year. It's just the nature of a city, and if you look at the rental market in a city like Manchester, the typical duration of leases is whatever it may be. It's pretty short term. So whether it's a year or 2 years, and people are often moved during those periods. So there's a significant number of properties in the city that turn hands, and of course when they do that, the kids turn with it. So that's why whenever we try to quote numbers about what's going on in the school system at any one time and the number of the kids in the schools at any one moment, it's an estimate. We always know, as the school district knows, on any given day, if you ask them looking backwards how many kids were registered in the schools last Friday or something. But so they usually use a date like the last day of September or the first day of October and take a snapshot and say, this is how many kids we have in the school, because it just moves around and around and around. Another topic that I was, just as we were doing this program last week, the news broke about a young student in Manchester who had been bullied, and as a result of that bullying, this young person took their own lives. And first of all, my deepest sympathy and condolences to the family and the friends and neighbours and the community that were impacted by this. And it is a very sad occurrence. bullying is a terrible thing, and it's amazing, that it continues. It's easy to simplify it. I know, of people who were bullying who didn't even know they were bullying. Now, that's not to excuse, bad behavior and people being bullies, but sometimes, a group of kids, laughing at. I mean, what's the difference between, a kid comes in and you laugh because he's wearing his funny shirt, and he's very happy to be laughed with because it's like you're all pals together, and it's like, look at the funny shirt I wore today. Um, in another circumstance, the kid doesn't think his shirt is funny, or maybe it's the only one he has, or maybe he feels bad about it already, and kids laughing at him, and that now becomes bullying, and I see it happen again and again and again. I have, um, I think more attention needs to be paid to it in the Manchester School District. I don't think Manchester is particularly bad or good. I don't have. I don't have a strong opinion about that one way or the other. There's no evidence that I know of that bullying is an item um, that is a huge problem in Manchester schools or anything. But I just think it's a problem across society. It's a problem in schools more generally. And now with the advent of social media, um, it is it even gets more difficult. But um, I do think that teachers and administrators need to sort of. I hate to say this because it's not based on particular referenced incidents, but I think they need to be more aware of it and take it more seriously. Because I think teachers are used to the rough and tumble of kids every day, and when you get into middle school, for instance, it's the kids interact with each other, and I'm sure it's very difficult to sort of stand there as an adult and try and parlay between these different voices and discern which ones are we have some bad intent and which ones don't. But I think the very first time that the very mention of somebody feeling troubled or bullied or whatever, it should be met and pushed back hard. I also think that parents need to talk to their children, not just the kids who might be bullied, but I just know of an incident that happened like red hot very recently. Um, of a small group of kids led by one particular young man who the usual words with lovely parents and nice families and everything, and the way they treated another person was very hurtful to them, and that young person was at home not wanting to go to school, etc. And the boys involved, I trust that in this case they thought it was funny. Well, it wasn't funny, but awareness and talking to one's children is key. And hindsight is 2020. I know. I never want to walk in anybody else's shoes, or certainly never ever judge anybody. Um, but keeping a keen eye, I guess, because the indicators are going to be, changing of mood, in the sense that what was a joyful kid is no longer, or changing friends and those other things. And I use those indicators around things like bullying, as well as around issues like behavior, hanging with the wrong group kind of stuff, or and all of it. You're either sort of actively involved. I don't want to say actively involved in your kids' lives. Of course, you ought to be, but you either have a weather eye out for these things, or you don't, and parents just need to pay attention. So I'm hoping that this young lady's death won't be entirely in vain, and that the school district can find a way to redouble its efforts on this topic. And it's like so many other topics that need to be dealt with. Um, this is just another one. And this is part of the issue of having a diverse and complicated and exciting and dynamic school district. That there are lots of issues to be dealt with, as well as all the glories and all the benefits of these things. I do want to. We have a guest joining us in a little bit, so I want to touch off of a topic that coming up towards July 4th. As I said at the top of the program, the whole idea of the lack of people's ability to speak to each other with respect and treat others with dignity is becomes just more and more to the forefront of my mind. And I have a friend who I disagree with very strongly on the issue of child separation from families and the current sessions policy on the border, etc. And it's very difficult. I've tried to stay off of social media on this topic, and it's very difficult to speak to him because he sees the world as sort of a binary thing. It's them against us, and I without entering the frame myself, I look at the so-called discourse going on, and people are attacking each other and saying the most horrendous things. And calling each other names, and it's as though there were tribes of people deeply devoted to the Republican cause and deeply devoted to the Democratic Party, and I just don't see it like that. I think the vast majority of people on any given day are busy going around their lives. They're not busy trying to undermine the country from either the right or the left. Frankly, I don't think anybody who's involved in the political process in the mainstream parties like Republicans and Democrats are trying to undermine anything. What they are passionate people who feel strongly about the policies that they support, and so they speak about them, and they are very important to them. There are other people in life who are very passionate about the Patriots or the Steelers. There are others who are passionate about global warming or not, and there are people who So I just find it awful that. Somebody would just call somebody else names based on their opinions. I was asked to offer. I was invited by somebody who is a very very strong President Trump supporter the other day to comment on this issue of some people who followed Kirstjen Nielsen, the Department of Homeland Security Secretary, into a restaurant, and then there was an incident. They shouted at her while she was at a Mexican restaurant of all things. And then after that, at another time, a night or so later, people went, and outside the apartment building that she lived in, there were a group of people, small though it was, who were, something like "no peace for families, then no peace for you," I didn't respond as yet. I'm responding right here because I don't want to be part of the conversation. I don't want to be part of any conversation that adds to the ire and the anger and etc. Because on one side, I understand how people are incensed, as I am. I am incensed is the only proper word because I am very angry, actually. And I don't often get angry, but I am angry about the issue of the separation of families. And I have no interest in going through a 15-point discussion about who started what, how, and all that. I think it's just a very much more simple thing. But I certainly don't want to argue the thing with people, etc. So in the case of people being attacked on the street, I don't mean physically, I mean being shouted at and stuff. I understand the anger of the people who do it and the motivation, but I wish we could conduct ourselves in a much more civil fashion and talk to each other with some respect. I think the stuff that you see online and the way that, you know, people get painted into a box, and it's just it is very frightening, actually, because this idea of dehumanizing people, of calling people, and I you know, from my worldview, I'll call out President Trump on this and his, you know, reference to people as infestation on the border, and, you know, they are not the best people. And this, you know, he revisited that speech last week about Mexicans sending murderers and rapists. And I just find it all, you know, whether you agree or not, or where you support, just the whole use of language, and then just the use of foul language and expletives. You know, I've noticed that on the mainstream media that there are a couple of new words that have crept in that are now into the lexicon of words that are allowable on nightly television. That includes, you know, the nearest I want to go is the S whole countries, and now I've heard that sort of spoken on the network media, and that, you know, it's not that I'm a prude, but our conversations need to be way better than that. And I like to think that when we're out on July 4th looking at fireworks, celebrating the independence of the great United States of America, that the vast majority of Americans are not represented by those who were shouting at each other and throwing vile barbs at each other, that most people are, not that they're acquiescent, not that they're apathetic, they may be very motivated. I would suggest people on all sides of the spectrum, if you're really, really anxious to see change, or to continue that which is going on now, then go out and vote. That's the opportunity. And the rest is rhetoric. Sitting in bars and shouting at the guy next to you, or pounding the keyboard all night is not, well, it may be a little effective when you're in your own circle, but there's nobody really listening to you. You're in an echo chamber. So I'm sorry to go on, but we all can see this. This is like this, you know, the frog in the warm water slowly coming to a boil thing. We can all sort of recognize what's going on, and the very people. And I have to say this, and I'm not going to call names out. And, you know, if they get worse, it's not that I'm shy. I might sometime, but some of our own civic leaders here in Manchester, I don't want to enter the fray that they're in already either, but just the intemperate language, albeit that it's typed, the screaming at the other people, calling them nasty names, deriding, you know, whole sections of the population that you don't agree with. First of all, it does nothing for the office that you represent, and no constituents in the city of Manchester ought to be called foul names by their alderman. I think it's all wrong. I think that the aldermen who've done it should rethink their positions and calm down the tone. Frankly, I think that Mayor Craig should you know, bring people in her office and have a word and say, you know, this is not acceptable behaviour on behalf of a public service in the city of Manchester. We need some level of decorum and proper behaviour. While I wait for our guest to arrive, let me see where we are for time. 6:28. So it's exciting to note that this thing called Velcro University, I've seen it called, which is a collaboration between the school district and the Velcro company, a proud manufacturer native here to Manchester. Of all the things Manchester gave the world, one of them is Velcro, and it's, you know, we think of Velcro as a very simple product, and it is a very simple product, which of course is its glory. But it's simple, but has a hell of a lot of applications, and you can find it worldwide in all kinds. Even the most, I'm sure, if you went to space, that you would find Velcro in space. Actually, you might find a lot of it. But anyway, the school district is collaborating with Velcro, that hopefully, starting in September 2018, in 2 months' time, that starting at West High School, that young people will be able to learn some competencies through collaboration with Velcro. I don't know if it's all spelled out right now, but I know that Mr. Dishard, the principal over there, is excited about it. Members of the school board approved it the other night, and I think it's great. It also will allow kids to have internships in Velcro, the ones who qualify are at the top end of that, and so they will be pre-prepared for jobs in manufacturing industry, etc. And in my case, when I think about education, it's a case of all of the above. So I think there certainly is a place for this, and it's good to see. I just hope that it is properly that it is properly done. I was critical in the past of previous efforts that were going to have kids trained to work in the catering business, cleaning bins and emptying, bussing tables, and it seemed to me that if that was that's not a dishonorable profession, but it seemed to me that was a pretty strange way of beginning the process. I mean, what is little known is that there are already great examples of this in the city of Manchester, albeit not maybe as large as the Velcro one, and that may be the beginning of something bigger. I hear the pitter-patter of tiny feet. Welcome. So we do have a program with. Let me just welcome somebody to the studio. If you'd like to have a seat, and we'll be with you momentarily. So we do have a program already in the Manchester schools, which is with we've got the you're right in the shot there. Thank you. No, we got the back of your head. We got the front of your head. We've got all of you. Thank you. So we do have a program with General Electric in Hooksett, where students in the city in the city of Manchester school districts have the opportunity of doing a program in high school through the Aviation Museum near the airport, and part of that program is hands-on experience at the aviation or avionics facility in Hooksett for GE, where they learn about aeronautics and other things. So there are a lot of things going on in the school district that are not sort of front of mind and that are not always widely known, and so it's important to I think always be asking about opportunities. It isn't possible, or it's difficult for, given the differences between the different high schools and guidance staff and all that, for everybody to know about everything. I think it's there for anybody who wants it. It's a question of seeking out those opportunities if the things that you're interested in. And lastly, before I introduce our guest, I would say that if there are programs that people think would make sense, if there were a I don't know, ocean diving company on the Merrimack River that might be interested in having a collaboration with the schools. The doors are wide open. Dr. Vargas, I'm sure, will be very very interested in hearing from you all. So, with that, as we reach the bottom of the half hour here, I'm very pleased to have a political candidate with us, Terence O'Rourke. Hi, Terence. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
How are you doing?
Good.
And with a name like Terence O'Rourke, we're not just interviewing Irish guys, but it does help.
It does.
You get yeah.
Keep the conversation going.
Absolutely, yes. So Terence is a candidate for Congressional District 1 to replace Carol Shea Porter, who is not running, and so and you're a candidate for the Democratic nomination.
Yes.
All right. So Terence, if you'd like to just tell us a little bit about yourself and.
So I'll sort of work backwards. Right now I'm the city attorney for the city of Rochester. Prior to that, I've been both a state and federal prosecutor. I was an assistant county attorney in Rockingham and Carroll County, and then I was an assistant United States attorney. And then before that, I was in the United States Army from 2003 to 2007. I was an officer in the Field Artillery.
Oh, nice.
Stationed at Fort Bragg, and then I did a year tour in Iraq, where I was a operations advisor to an Iraqi infantry battalion. So,
wow.
And then I went to law school at Tulane, and I did my undergrad at Marquette University.
All right, it's quite the resume for a young man.
Thank you.
Or relatively young man. It sounded like my father. I'm saying young man to a guy. It's like, but that is an impressive resume. So, and then what brought you to the idea of running for public office?
So
After all that public service you've done already.
Being in a Fed, whether that's as an officer in the Army or as an AUSA or as a state prosecutor, you're not really allowed to get into politics too much. When I became the city attorney for Rochester, you're a municipal employee, so
Right.
you're allowed to sort of dabble in federal stuff. And I was on the budget committee in my hometown in Alton, and once Carol Shea Porter said she wasn't running, I looked at it and said, this is it's a perilous time our country's facing, in the world's, in my opinion, the world's facing. And I have 3 kids at home, and I looked and I was like, I don't want to be that guy sitting on a bar stool the rest of his life yelling at the TV screen.
Right.
And so I wanted to step up and meet the challenges our country's facing.
Right. Good. So you have 3 kids at home. How old are they?
11, 4, and 2.
All right. You're in the heart of it. I love
Exactly.
I have 4 who are 21, 19, 18, and 16.
Wow.
Yeah, and if you ever happen to do a little TV show, you don't talk about them at all because they don't. Like, if I were to mention one of their names,
Embarrass them.
There'd be a cop hitting me on the back of the head when I walk in. Damn, you didn't mention me, which is I never do.
Yeah.
They're anonymous. Everybody knows who they are.
Anonymous.
Great term. So, not do you want to spend any time advertising other candidates, but how big is the field right now?
In terms of the Democratic side, I believe we're up to 11.
Up to 11. Wow.
Yeah.
So there'll be a big shakeout come September.
September
right?
11th. Yes.
September 11th.
Yes.
Okay. So, and the first congressional district includes Manchester over to the seacoast.
And it's basically from a little south of Manchester, shoot up to Conway, and then all the way down to the seacoast and back over.
Yeah.
But cuts off like Salem and stuff.
Yes,
like
yeah.
Rockham, but
It has, it's gerrymandered.
It is, yes,
Yeah,
basically.
Yeah. So, we could talk for hours, and those who know me know I could talk for hours. So, sort of main themes, or the things that what's the top of mind?
So there's one of the things that I always talk about, and I have a website that you can go to, o'rourkeforcongress.com, see all my positions on issues. But the two things.
Sorry, can we just? So it's O'Rourke, OROURKE.
Yes, and then FORcongress.com. No apostrophe, all lowercase.
Right. Got it.
And but what I started on this campaign, one of the major issues is I want to end the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and more than that, I want to put an end to undeclared, endless wars in America. We haven't had declared war since World War II, but we've been at war ever since then. And what I see is this is an abdication of Congress's responsibility to declare war.
Right.
And we got to remember where we came from in this country.
Yeah.
And when we left the British Empire, one of the things we wanted to get rid of was the unitary power of the king to decide when and where we go to war, who's going to serve in the military, how much it's going to cost, and when it ends.
Right.
So they separated. No, Congress declares when and where we go to war. All the president's supposed to be is the head general of the army, the head admiral of the Navy.
Right.
Well, now what we have. Come back again. We have one person. It's not just Trump. It was Obama and W.
Yeah.
They say who the terrorists are, where they are, who I'm going to send to go get them, and when it ends. So we got to put a stop to that.
And it's I won't say misinformation, but the lack of information. Today in Afghanistan, 75% of the territory is run by the Taliban now, and the United States military has effectively abandoned the land.
Right.
So we've gone now entirely. The reason why we don't see, and I'm very glad that we don't see daily casualties in Afghanistan, is because we fly everywhere.
Right.
Nobody drives anywhere, and most people watching this aren't even aware of that because we're too busy on all sides of the house. I'm not an anti-media person. I'm not somebody who sees conspiracies everywhere, but yet I do get annoyed at the so-called mainstream media, which I have no disrespect for. But I get annoyed that they it's the latest tinny, shiny object they're at.
Right.
And we've had the longest war in American history in Afghanistan,
Yes.
spending down our treasure in blood. it's a disaster. It's easy to put words on it like disaster. I don't think it's a disaster, but clearly a decision needs to be made.
Right, and you're making a great point about the media moving on to next shiny out, but it's not just the media. We have folks right out here on Elm Street, dining, having a great time tonight. It is nice to see all the development here in Manchester, but the American people go about their day and don't even think about the fact that we're at war. As you say, the longest war in American history. Iraq is catching up as we just hit the 15-year anniversary, and then we got soldiers in Syria and Somalia and Niger and all over the world, and Americans just go on with their lives because the country isn't at war. The military is. And my dad is a Vietnam vet. He said, we've essentially become the Hessians of our time. We're just a bunch of professional soldiers who go off and do the bidding of whoever it is at the time, but the country isn't there along with us, and we need to stop that.
We do, and it was very obvious. We won't. We'll be looking forward in a second, but it was very. I remember something that I insisted on doing for myself. I'm not usually so type A personality person, but during the beginning of the Iraq war, and as it went onwards. There was the CNN had the every night they put up the names of the people who had died, and the names and rank and age and where they were killed and what. So it was very quick, like 3 lines for each person, and eventually they stopped putting it up. They stopped. First of all, they stopped replacing it. This was like year 4 and 5.
Right.
And I insisted for my own sanity on looking at the website every day.
Right.
So I went after CNN when they stopped, either we've stopped losing people or you've stopped counting them because it doesn't matter anymore. Right. And it has to matter. So
exactly.
You're ringing my bell because that's sadly it's not item 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 in people's agenda today in politics and in this election. But I think it's very, very important.
I agree.
Our time is tight, and we do have 20 minutes. But because we're on this show, I want to ask you about education.
Yes.
Education in New Hampshire in particular, and sort of writ more large maybe since you'll be in Congress in the United States. How do you see all of that?
Here's what I think about in terms of public education. Public education should produce citizens. I think our schools should be citizens' factories. And that means different things for different people depending on your abilities. But every kid who comes out of school, when they graduate high school, let's not even talk about going off to higher education. Let's talk about finishing high school. You should walk out that door ready to be the fullest person you can possibly be.
Ready to meet your full potential.
Exactly. Ready to meet your full potential, whatever that is, whether you want to go off and be a lawyer or be a military officer, or you want to become a chef or a mechanic, or you want to work for Saffron there in Rochester. Any of that, you should be ready to move on that next step.
Right.
And that requires being funded, fully funded. And that's something, of course, that we can talk about what goes on at the state level, but I'm running for federal. The feds, that is where the major source of dollars should be to sort of fill in the gaps where states are falling short. But what we have to look at is who are we dealing with on the other side, right? Whenever you're negotiating anything, you got to know what does that person across the table from you value? What's their objective? And my opinion is their objective on the other side, and you'll see it with, again, I'll get into the state stuff, with a guy like Frank Edelblut. He doesn't believe in public education.
Right.
He wants to destroy public education. He has his own worldview that he wants to impose. And, he has this Opus Dei view of the world that he would like to see imposed. And he knows if you get a little L liberal education, that's not going to happen. So when you're on a negotiating table with somebody and they want to destroy public education, you're not even going to talk about vouchers, right? They don't really want to help kids. They want to destroy public education.
Absolutely. And by the way, he's going to be in town, I think it's next week. He and Andrew Klein, who's former of the Josiah Bartlett Institute or whatever it's called, think tank. I think that's a stretch, but not to be unkind to anybody, but it's just how it is. So they're going to be here at the Founders Academy, and there is a small protest being planned, I think, against Mr. Edelblut. Betsy DeVos, Secretary of Education nationally, probably the worst. Well, there's no question she's the worst Secretary of Education we've ever had, but a woman whose even if you're a dyed-in-the-wool conservative Republican capital or you'll go down with the last ship guy or woman, you have to look at her and know she's totally ill-suited and more importantly unqualified and doesn't have the intellect, let alone the knowledge to do the job.
And no curiosity either. If you remember now, obviously Senator Franken is gone now, but the exchanges between him and her at the confirmation hearing, it's some you've never seen a thing like that.
But she said about the bear. Remember, she talked about guns in schools, and she said we need them for shooting bear, and
right.
But what's terrible is that a person who has already spent many hundreds of millions of dollars attacking public education, and now is overseeing the reduction of $800 billion in public education funding.
Right. Again, she's obviously, you say, not qualified, but she still managed to move an agenda.
Oh, yes.
To gut public education in this country.
The agenda is moving day by day, hour by hour. It's really frightening to see what's happening right underneath her and the people that she's brought into what other people would have called apparatchiks back in the day.
Right.
I remember when the Bush administration with the Mr. What was his name? The Attorney General.
Ashcroft.
No, the guy after
Gonzalez.
Gonzalez. Yeah. But they had effectively like a political operative in every department who had to oversee all the issuance of all information.
Right.
So it was a first in the American government of the United States where a political appointee got to veto or edit every statement being made by every department of government.
Right. And that's scary, right?
For political purity.
And you would think Department of Justice is a great example. That, I mean, you would hope that there are some things that we do in government that are apolitical, but no, you're right. They made it political. You all remember the controversy there where Karl Rove went and said, "I want that U.S. attorney fired. I want that one fired."
Right.
They were all Republicans, but I suppose they weren't sufficiently Rovian or Bushian, and he wanted them gone. Like that's an unbelievable.
It seems that
thing.
the entire most of the leadership of the Mueller inquiry is Republican.
They all are.
And yet they're not Republican enough anymore. But
exactly.
It's very. We live in strange times.
We do.
But back to the state of New Hampshire. We have some we have issues around education. So we often hear people talk here about unfunded federal mandates, which is in this case is actually a joke. I mean, I hate to be like that with people who might be listening, but what they're really referring to, the only thing that it comes down to is the fact that special ed, which is required under the Education Act, isn't fully. When that was originally passed, it was thought the federal government would fund it at around 40%. It's never funded more than 17%.
Right.
We know why it was never funded by more than 17%. It's because Republicans in Congress won't allow it to be funded by more.
Right.
But they use that as excuse. Anyway, so how would you? What's one thing you might do as soon as you're in Congress to help education resourcing here in the state of New Hampshire?
Well, you made a great point about the 40% SPED funding that should have been met years ago, and it hasn't been. And what we have to, it's not just education. Let's talk about what has happened is that the federal government has stopped funding programs, and the state has stopped funding them. But you don't want to stop having good schools. You don't want to stop having good roads. So it falls back on the taxpayers of a town or a city.
Yep.
So your property tax rates are going up and up and up. And we had a situation, obviously, in Rochester where we had to override the tax cap. You folks had to do that here in Manchester, and
we overrode the spending side of it. But
the spending side, we only have the one side in Rochester. So, and that's because it's the same thing Rochester was in Manchester. It's the school department, and then there's all this misinformation. Oh, the school department is being mismanaged. No, it's not being mismanaged.
Right.
It's just that 10 years ago when they put these tax cuts in, they're receiving funding from the state and funding from the feds.
Right.
And it's not just hasn't kept up with inflation. It's gone.
Right.
It's gone. But yet the requirements.
So the annoying thing, and I hate to be so partisan about it, but I find it hard to be like let others who have their partisanship. I'm not trying to be partisan.
Right.
It's just my just the set of facts that I look at. The very people who want to hold the line and say we're not spending. I'm not spending another dime, let's say, on public education on the local side, are supporting the people fully. They're the main backers of the people who are taking away the money coming down from the state side. They support all the bills in the House that pull funding away from Manchester. So we have members of the Manchester School Board who actually go up to Concord and have voted to pull money away from Manchester to lower our budget. And then they come down to Manchester and sit on a school board to talk and know what the problems are. So,
and you see that it's not just in Manchester. You see that in municipalities around the state of New Hampshire, and it's just cognitive dissonance that you see that that somehow they go to Concord and they don't seem to understand the ramifications that what they do there
Well,
are going to have back home.
yeah, but there is there is one simple thread, right? What they really want to do is to defund public education. So like you said at the outset,
They don't believe
there
it.
is no mystery, right? Because that comes back to like local control. They want local control. But when the town of Bedford has an international studies baccalaureate program, the House in New Hampshire wants to step in and almost did, to have a state policy that wouldn't allow international studies at the high school level. So much for local control.
It's the only one's convenient for this.
So let's go back to national issues. I think going on from education. So New Hampshire faces challenges demographically, reduction in population reduction, and so what about that issue and about attracting business to New Hampshire?
So I think first of all, overall in America, we need a robust infrastructure plan. But let's talk about what's happening in New Hampshire in terms of the graying of New Hampshire, right?
Right.
We're getting older. Our younger folks are leaving, and we need to keep them here. And we need to attract businesses by attracting young people, right? So New Hampshire, and again, you don't want to pick on states or pick on this, but Kansas has a very similar problem, right? It's getting very, very, very old, very, very rapidly. New Hampshire doesn't have the problem where people don't want to be in Kansas. People don't want to be in Kansas. People want to be in New Hampshire.
Right.
And especially the older you get, when you start having kids and stuff, the more and more you're attracted back home to New Hampshire. It's that middle period, right? Between 18 and maybe 35, maybe that's getting a little older, where New Hampshire doesn't have some of the things younger people want, right?
Right.
So
60% of New Hampshire, the highest in the United States of any state, 60% of students leaving high school to go to universities go to a state other than in New Hampshire, go outside of state. That's the highest percentage in the United States.
Well, it probably has to also do with the fact that our in-state tuition is higher than they can pay at private schools.
And our in-state tuition is also the highest in the United States, and we also are the state that has had the largest cut to public education funding in history, which was the Bill O'Brien bill that reduced public education funding by 50% back in the day. And we're sitting here with St. Anselm's laying off 13 people, Keene State laying off 25 or 30 people. So there are real consequences to this.
Absolutely.
Wake up and smell the roses, folks.
So one thing that part of my plan to keep young kids here, young folks here, is to have a system of rail and bus that connects everyone in New Hampshire to everyone else in America. But let's focus on New Hampshire. What does that do?
Right.
That allows a young couple, young group of kids, young people to live and work in New Hampshire, but still be able to go to Boston or Portland or Montreal, God forbid, leaving into a foreign country, enjoy all the things young people want to be involved with, but still live in New Hampshire.
Right.
And then, so we don't have to sort of change how we do things in New Hampshire. Yes, we have Portsmouth, which is great, and like we talked about earlier, there's a lot of good things happening here in Manchester. But we're a lower density state, so we're never going to have a Major League Baseball team here in New Hampshire. Not going to happen.
Right.
But we have one right down the road in Boston. So let's give these young people access to that. And that's going to attract businesses. When we talk about there's some idea of Amazon coming to New Hampshire, and I think it probably would have been a good idea for them for all sorts of reasons.
Right.
But one of the things they looked at is we don't have
it was never
infrastructure.
I don't mean any disrespect to our governor at all, or to our other public representatives, but just from a macro picture, sort of a nationwide picture. First of all, you just have to. I love New Hampshire. I choose to live here.
Right.
Most people, were born here.
Exactly.
I choose to live here, and I could leave anytime I want. And there are those who wish I would. Some faster than others. Some might even help me out. But putting it in perspective, though, New Hampshire is a very small state with a very small population, and it's a wonderful place to live. But we could basically, talk about what's his name when the guy says in A Few Good Men, you couldn't handle the truth. Well, the truth is simple. Amazon was never coming to New Hampshire. We don't have the infrastructure in place for them.
Absolutely not.
And we don't have the people there for them. Where would we find 70,000 people?
We'd have to import them.
Yeah, we'd have to import them, and we have no way of importing because it takes us, 2.5 decades to build to widen I-93.
Yes.
And Route 101, Keene can't grow any bigger than it is, and Peterborough is stuck where it is because nobody can get there from here.
You can't get there from here. Yeah.
And by the way, it is in the straight transport plan for 2030 or 2029 that we might widen 101 just a teeny bit. So rail would be. I'm a big fan of rail. I see what it's done elsewhere.
And we had it before. It's sad when there's old maps you look at.
that, and you see, I live in Alton. We used to have the railroad
Right.
run through there and connected to Boston and Boston to Portland Rail. It's
Right.
gone, so it can happen again.
Yeah, yeah. By all means, yeah. So what else is there? We've got. What about the issue of global warming, environmental impact, etc. I mean, we have seacoast, albeit 15 miles long. We do have seacoast,
do.
and we're dependent. We have a significant tourist industry, and global warming isn't just about the rise of sea water, right? There are other effects. So again, another subject that's, I know, divisive, but if you could touch off that.
Yeah, I wish it wasn't divisive. It doesn't.
It shouldn't be, right? It's
And
scientific.
When you think of, the Teddy Roosevelt was a Republican, and their EPA was signed into law by Richard Nixon.
Right.
These are Republicans, and they certainly understood preserving nature, and they certainly understood science. So I hope we're going to get at a point where there is no debate. The debate only exists because they're being funded by big oil and the rest of these interests. But yeah, thing about New Hampshire is we are a beautiful state, and we do rely on our pristine nature to fund our tourist economy. And I read this article, this is about 10 years ago now, and they talk about the effects of global warming. And they were talking about, as we move forward, that New Hampshire's climate would become more like Missouri. Think how that would affect us if it would change the entire lifestyle we have here in our entire industries and stuff, along with what would it do to the animal life and the plant life here and everything.
Right.
So, Paris Climate Accord, obviously we got to get back. That was actually not strong enough, in my opinion, but we need to get back on that. And something I think we should get into right away is a nationwide cap and trade system. We have a regional one here in New England. There's one in California. It works. And it was actually a Republican idea from the mid-'80s, and it appeals to the folks on that side because it's based on greed.
We're down to the last couple of minutes. Since it's topical, we'll have to have you back another day between now and September. Trade, right? Trade's big, trade war, all this. And so we heard yesterday Harley Davidson moving jobs to Thailand. We heard today that Segway is moving its production from from Bedford to China. Trade wars, and sensible foreign policy.
So in terms,
we got about 2 minutes.
I'll say this in terms of what Trump thought he was trying to do, is sort of protect the American industry. What he didn't understand was it's gone. Right. So I'm for recapturing the manufacturing base here in America, but you can't. What he did was he said, I'm going to protect these industries that don't exist yet. Right. So you didn't have an industry in place to protect. So what I would like to see is I'm not against having fair competition with our global global competitors, and protecting American industry and bringing these jobs back home. But you actually do it first.
I think to interrupt you, and I know I am interrupting you. The Trump policy would have Manchester retain its mills at all cost. The Concord stagecoach would still be being built in Concord, whether people wanted them or not.
Right.
And they'd have nice harnesses waiting for the horses to get into them, and that's the way it would be, because that's what we do.
Right.
The policy makes no sense whatsoever. Basically, we're talking about a president who sees the new age of steam coming because he wants to advance coal. And we had there's a major trade agreement or trade discussions going on starting this week between the European Union and China, and we're no longer at the table. And the same time as that was announced that was happening, we had Donald Trump saying that he thought the World Bank was a bad actor and was a problem. An institution created by America for America with American support. So, last few words for the folks. Anything you want to say? You want to address this camera right here? You'll be right.
So I'd just like to invite everybody again to my website, auroraforcongress.com, and I would hope that everyone keeps an open mind between now and September for the primary. And we have 11 candidates. Give everybody a look, and let's have a good race here in September.
All right. Thank you, Terence, and hopefully we can have you back another day. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to finish by wishing you all a wonderful July 4th. Please go out, like I said, next Tuesday night, July 3rd at 6 o'clock. The food will start at Arms Park. 7:30, the 39th Army Band will be playing, a wonderful occasion. And at 9:30, let the fireworks roll. Come out, have fun, enjoy Manchester. Thank you, and good luck in the election. See you, folks. Happy July 4th.